She didn't scream. That's what haunts me. Those were the whispered words of Bridget O'Malley, the Hennessy maid who saw more than she was ever meant to. August 14, 1847, 9:17 a.m. Fall River, Massachusetts. Two bodies cooling in pools of their own blood. One face cleaved open with 19 swings of a hatchet. The other struck so hard the skull cracked like porcelain, yet no one heard a thing. Because the killer didn't come from outside. You've been told the sanitized version, polite whispers about a confused daughter, a bungled trial, and a courtroom circus. But you were never told about the power games, the hidden hands, or what really lived inside that house on 2nd Street. You weren't supposed to hear this, but now you will. This wasn't just a murder. It was a ritual, a cleansing of control, a dismantling of patriarchal power cloaked in domestic civility. Behind the lace curtains and high collars, the Hennessy home was a crucible of psychological warfare. Andrew Hennessy ruled with cold precision, and his second wife, Abby, maintained the order. But his daughters, they were bred from rebellion. Lizzie didn't smile. She studied, she watched, she waited. And that summer she broke what history buries, the blood remembers. And the truth is this: the Fall River killings were not spontaneous. They were orchestrated, controlled, a silent insurrection against the very architecture of Victorian obedience. Every hatchet swing was an act of forbidden liberation. Terrifying, precise, unholy. Lizzie wasn't mad, she was awakened. What if the trial wasn't a failure of justice but a performance? What if the real verdict was decided long before the jury entered the room? Look deeper and you'll see fingerprints of something older, colder, something that used Lizzie as both pawn and blade. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the photographs were doctored, why Bridget never returned to Ireland, and why Lizzie's diary was burned in the church furnace at 3:11 a.m. on All Saints' Day. You're not watching history. You're stepping into its mausoleum. And what's buried here isn't just bodies, it's the truth your ancestors were told to forget. They called her a spinster, an oddity. But behind closed doors, Lizzie Hennessy was something far more dangerous, a woman who saw through the illusion. At church, she sat in silence, her eyes fixed not on the pulpit but on the faces of men who preached virtue while brokering land deals in secret. She saw the ledger books behind the altar, the factory owners slipping envelopes to clergy. Fall River wasn't holy, it was a theater of control. And Lizzie, she stopped believing in the script she knew her father had. Enemies, industrial, political, spiritual. But the truth that cracked her wide open came not from outside, it came from the second floor. That summer, Lizzie overheard something through the thin walls of the Hennessy home, a conversation not meant for her ears. Her father, Abby, and a man whose name never appeared in any legal record. They weren't discussing money, they were discussing inheritance. Not of wealth, but of silence. The family fortune, the real one, didn't come from coffins or real estate. It came from a trust founded in 1831, one that funded asylums, orphanages, and reform schools that swallowed girls whole. The Hennessy name was on the board of directors of 5 such institutions. Lizzie traced the papers herself, locked in the desk her father thought she'd never touch. What she found wasn't bookkeeping, it was a list of names, girls, ages 6 to 15, dozens, then hundreds. And one line that changed everything: acquired for study. August 2nd, payment received in full. Her father hadn't just built wealth. He'd helped build a system, a machine that commodified innocence and buried it beneath moral respectability. Lizzie realized she wasn't a daughter, she was property. And what her stepmother called the family legacy was a ledger of lives destroyed. This wasn't madness, it was revelation. She stopped eating, she stopped praying, she sharpened her perception like a blade, and then she picked up the real one. This is where your transformation begins. If you feel it, if your skin tightens at the edges of this truth, comment the phrase "blood remembers" below. Twice, once for the lie you were told, once for the man you're becoming. You're not just hearing a story, you're cracking the shell of the world you thought was real, and it only gets darker from here. By August 3rd, the air inside the Hennessy house was thick with dread, the kind of silence that sticks to your lungs, that tells you something sacred is about to shatter. Lizzie barely slept. She moved through the rooms like a shadow. She had stopped calling Abby Mrs. Hennessy. She had stopped calling anyone anything because words were part of the cage, and she was preparing to tear it down that morning. Andrew Hennessy received a letter, delivered by hand. No return address. Inside, a single page, unsigned. It read, "There are eyes in your attic and your bloodline is rotting from the root." He burned it, but not before Lizzie saw it. It confirmed what she already suspected. This wasn't just about her. She was part of something far older, and far more orchestrated. You see, the Hennessys were one of 7 families tied to a buried chapter of American history, what local Freemasons once whispered as the Pact of the Mill Lords. 7 patriarchs, 7 institutions, 7 oaths, to maintain order through control of land, labor, and lineage. Andrew Hennessy was not just a landlord, he was a keeper of that pact. And Lizzie, she was born into a role she never chose. The night before the killings, Bridget saw her in the cellar. Candles chalked, old papers spread across the floor, Latin phrases, medical diagrams, records of missing girls. Lizzie wasn't praying. She was confronting. At 2:14 a.m., she walked barefoot through the house, stopped at her father's door, watched him sleep. She didn't kill him that night. She waited because some thresholds require timing. August 4th, 2 swings to the back of Abby's skull. 11 more after she hit the floor. An hour later, Andrew struck from behind while he napped. He never saw it coming, but that wasn't the point. This wasn't revenge, it was interruption. When the authorities arrived, Lizzie sat calm, bloodless, composed. And when they asked if she knew anything, she said, "Something was taken from me. I simply took it back." You've been told she was deranged. But what if the madness was clarity? What if she didn't lose her mind, she found her purpose? You've already commented blood remembers twice. Now stay locked in, because in the final chapter, we uncover the reason the system let her walk free and why, in truth, she never left the game at all. The jury took just 90 minutes. Not guilty, no punishment, no prison, no justice, they said. But you've been lied to again. What if the real trial didn't happen in that courtroom? What if the verdict was never about innocence but initiation? After the acquittal, Lizzie changed her name, Lisbeth. She bought a mansion on the hill, far above the smoke and grime of the factories below. She attended private galas, hosted philanthropic salons, and every Thursday night, for 13 years, a carriage with no insignia would arrive at her home and bring men in grey coats inside. What were they discussing behind those sealed parlor doors? What was passed down in whispers behind the lace and velvet? The pact of the mill lords was never just a myth. It evolved, adapted, and Lizzie, the girl who once threatened the hierarchy, was now embedded inside it. Because when you kill power, you don't destroy it, you inherit it. You inherit it. That's why Bridget was paid to leave Fall River in silence. Why court transcripts were altered. Why the coroner's original report, describing not just blunt trauma but ritual incisions, was redacted within days. The truth is simple and grotesque. Lizzie didn't escape the system. But it became part of its next phase. And she left behind clues. In the margins of her hymnal, investigators found Latin notations: sanguis sanctus, sanguis novus, holy blood, new blood. The system doesn't fear exposure. It thrives on disbelief. And the more absurd the story seems, the more impossible the suggestion, the safer the secret becomes. They rely on your refusal to see, but you see it now. This isn't just the story of a Victorian murder. It's the blueprint of how innocence is consumed, how rebellion is rebranded, how power reshapes itself in the shadow of every public atrocity. Lizzie Borden was not an anomaly. She was a prototype. And if you're still watching, you've already crossed the line between spectator and seeker. There is no going back. Comment blood remembers again below. Twice. Once for the daughters who vanished, once for the man you've become by listening. History doesn't repeat it. Recruits. And now you've been chosen to carry what they tried to bury. Handle it with intention, because truth, like an axe, is only dangerous in the hands of the awake.